Could anyone else hear water in the background? Running water.
It might be my PC, maybe the fan.
The answer, Ian, is yes, I can hear something in the background. I was just ignoring it.
I just muted everything here thinking it was something from my end.
On mute, see if you still hear it.
Yeah, it's June's.
It is, yeah.
Must be the waterfall in your back garden, June.
I wish. Actually, it's probably just a flooding.
I thought I wasn't going to get out of the village this morning. Messages on our local Facebook saying this road was flooded, that road was flooded. And they reckon that you could get out by care via one route that would have added 2 miles onto your journey. And I was getting quite anxious because it was my shopping day today. But I went the normal route and kept my fingers crossed that my car wouldn't flood in the process. By the time I came back, the water had all gone.
So I do apologise. I do apologise for the noise, but I've got a laptop that connects, and I've got 2 iPads in front of me, so probably quite a bit of technology.
Could somebody show me the background? I'm in a different room or a different computer, and it's a bit messy.
I can't get my backgrounds to work, but thankfully I've got a little bit more presentable house behind me at the moment now. So
That looks fine, Nick.
Thank you.
Are we waiting for anybody? Are we all here? Joe?
I think everyone is here. Yeah.
Right, so we'll start. Good evening, officers and any members of the public who are listening. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's Growth Infrastructure and Resources Scrutiny budget meeting. This is our opportunity to comment on the budget proposals and help inform the decision-making process feed into Cabinet on the 16th of February. Final reports will be presented to full Council for approval on the 22nd of February. Before we begin, may I remind you all to mute unless you are addressing an item, and raise your virtual hands should you wish to speak at any point in the meeting. So going to the agenda proper, apologies, Joe. Do we have any apologies?
No, we have none this evening.
Declarations of interest. Do we have any interest to be declared this evening? Councillor Oxley, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's with regards to fees and charges, as always, if we get into a detailed debate about fees and charges, I will declare a personal and prejudicial as a funeral celebrant who could actually, my business could be impacted on by fees and charges. So I will not take part in any debate if the agenda gets into any detail about fees and charges. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Petitions and deputations and questions, Joe, do we have any?
No, none, actually.
Okay, questions with notice from members. Do we have any formal questions at all?
No.
Okay. So now we actually go on to item 5, which is the Revenue and Capital Budget 2021 to 22 and the Medium-Term Financial Plan. Sav, I'll hand over to you at this point, and we also have Councillor Brown, the portfolio holder for finance, in attendance this evening, who would like to give a short presentation afterwards. So Sav, over to you.
Sorry. I beg your pardon. I will try and keep my presentation relatively short. I apologise to those in the audience who've already heard it, but you never know. I might say something different tonight. Even I don't know what I'm going to say from one day to the next. So a short presentation with some key messages and an update on some issues that are not highlighted in the budget reports, but some things that have happened since we put the draft together. As members know from the report, the local government draft financial settlement was very disappointing. It was certainly worse than I expected it to be. I thought we would get some increased government funding, and outside of COVID, we haven't, which I think is very disappointing, and I know that members will share that view. What the government do say is that our spending power, so the resources we have available to us, have increased by £1.4 million. But that assumes that we raise council tax by 5%. And it also assumes that we have an increase in our tax base, so the number of properties that are eligible to pay council tax. Now, you know, you don't need me to remind you that the government don't set council tax in Rutland, that our own elected members do. And so to assume 5% is an interesting way of going about it, but that's what they assume. So I think the message to elected members from the government is quite clear. In terms of the increase in the tax base, that hasn't really happened for us this year. We've got an increase of about 7 properties in the tax base, and that's largely because of a slowdown in housing growth, but also an increased numbers of people on local council tax support, which dampens the tax base. It means that we don't have people paying full council tax. So the government have made 2 assumptions, neither of which I agree with, but that's where we find ourselves. The draft budget that we put together was based on a 3% council tax increase as recommended by Cabinet, and that is 2% for general inflation, if you like, and 1% for social care. To remind members of what the rules are, then we can apply a 3% social care increase in any combination that we wish over the next 2 years. So we could do 2 and 1, 1 and 2, 3 and 0, whichever way round we wish to do it. And as I say, the report goes with 2 and 1%. Members will know from having read the report that my view as Section 151 officer is that we should be following the government direction, if you like, and going for a 5% increase. That simply gives us the maximum yield straight away. And at a time when under financial pressure, that is, I was left with little choice in terms of my advice. But I do understand, as you would imagine, that council tax decisions are not just about finance. There are other considerations, but my recommendation in the report, I believe, is quite clear. Members will also know that there are pressures emerging in this budget from all parts of the council, it has to be said. Members will know that we've been actively supporting our leisure provider, SLL, as they have had, like lots of businesses, to navigate these difficult times with having the facility closed and then obviously opened with social distancing applying and now closed again. They've come under severe financial pressure. They do run a tight ship, there's no doubt about that, but we have had to support them, and that's something which we've been encouraged to do by the government and something that we've been happy to do. Similarly, on waste management, due to the pandemic, we've extended our existing contracts. That has cost us more money, largely because the deal that we had in the first instance was very good. So it meant that when we come to retender it, we were always unlikely to see an increase in cost, and that is what has happened. And as I said, there are pressures across all parts of the council that have emerged in this budget. What that means in overall terms is that we have a gap. Our everyday spending exceeds our core income, if you like, by £2.6 million. So in this budget, we are proposing to plug that gap by using reserves, which is poor practice. That's something that you wouldn't want to do, certainly for any length of time. Reserves are there to help us where there are unforeseen issues, where there are emergency pressures. They're not there to help us balance core expenditures, certainly not on a long-term basis. And as members will have seen in the report, I am recommending that the minimum reserve level is increased from £2 to £3 million. A simple reason for this, if you look at the risks that we face as a council, some of them real, some of them potential risks, and they are outlined in the report, it feels to me like we're working in a very different environment to what we were previously. None of us know how we'll come out of the COVID-19 pandemic, what pressures might emerge, both economically, but with our population and the needs that they have. There is so much uncertainty about what's going to happen that, I feel it would be prudent for us to keep a minimum of £3 million of reserves on one side. And obviously we're above that at the moment, but we certainly want to maintain our reserves above that level going forward. I think it's fair to say that any hope that I had has probably been extinguished in relation to the funding position we find ourselves in. I know the settlement is a one-year settlement, and hopefully next year we'll get a 3 or 4 year settlement from government. But given the fact that our borrowing levels are, as a nation, are significant, I just don't see where the extra funding is going to come from. I don't see the government as the knight in shining armour. I don't think we're going to be rescued. I hope I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong. I don't see it. And I think we have to assume that is the case. So it leaves us with a gap this year. And obviously, as we all know, if you earn £25,000 a year and you spend at the rate of £30,000 a year, eventually you run out of money. And that's what will happen to us if we don't do something. And we'll run out of money, maybe 24, 25, maybe a year later, but at some point we will run out of money. So what I'm saying is the gap that we have this year of 22.6 million, we can't have a gap like that in the following year. For me, we know we've got a problem. We know the gap is too big. We have a duty to close that gap. It would be a complete failure of financial governance if we don't do something about it. So that is, in a sense, a key part of our challenge for next year. So 2 important targets. In year, as I say, in 21-22, we've got a 2.6 million gap. We need to reduce that gap by stopping spending in year. I think my report mentions, could we bring that gap down by £500,000? On reflection, I think we need to be heading more towards £1 million. That's what I would say. I think we need to be more ambitious than what I've suggested in my report, and I will change that in the final report that I write. But I think in the climate we're working in, we need to strive for more in year. And then touching on the point I raised a moment ago, when in a year's time, when we're setting the budget for 22-23, I really don't want to be talking about a figure of 2.6 million. We need to be talking about a figure of no more than 1 million in relation to our dependency on reserves. And that's our challenge. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to commit to balancing the books. It sounds obvious, but it's true. And that applies both to elected members. Fundamentally, you will make lots of decisions that will commit our funds. So, as members and as officers, we've got to work together to commit to balancing the books. We've got to show that commitment through action and decision making. We can all sit here tonight, can't we, and verbally say, oh yes, we commit to balancing the books, absolutely, that's what we're going to do. But the proof is in the pudding, and it will all be down to the actions we take. So what spending are we going to stop? What are we going to do to close that gap? That's where we show the commitment, not through words, through actions. Really important, that for me. We've got to prioritise the financial challenge. I think saving 2.6 million is not straightforward. I know that members have done their own work previously, looking at where we spend money and thinking about what we might do differently. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. we've got to prioritise balancing the books alongside our work on COVID-19. And in my opinion, at this moment in time, we've got to create as much capacity and space we can to focus on that. Other things, as important as they might be, in my opinion, we need to park for now. We need to defer. Let's remove the other distractions. If we distract ourselves on other issues that we might want to progress, we'll never meet the financial challenge. We never will. In terms of our spending, then we've got to challenge everything that we do. So when a decision comes before you, you've got to think hard. You know, I see things that are on the forward plan coming up, where we're talking about reprocuring bus routes. That's fine, but we could stop it. We could stop them, and that would save us some money straight away. It's up to you, members. The decisions will be put in front of you, and you will need to consider and do what you think is right in relation to both our financial challenge, but what's right for Rutland residents. Clearly, it's going to take time to do some of the things that we have to do. Some decisions we might be able to make quickly, others are going to take time. So I'd ask us all to be patient. But I think fundamentally we have to accept, and this applies to all local authorities, you know, we're going to have to prioritise our resources, and fundamentally we're going to have to stop doing some things or do some things less. I think anybody who sits here and thinks we can work a bit smarter, Sav, I know where there's a bit of waste, we can work a bit smarter and we'll close that gap. I don't agree with you. I really don't. Yeah, I think there's things we can do smarter. There's things we can do a bit differently, but fundamentally, we've got to prioritise and do some things a bit less. That's what I genuinely believe. Now for some updates. In terms of the provisional settlement obviously goes through a consultation process, and then the government issue a final settlement. Based on what I'm hearing, based on the things that I see, I sort of hoped, maybe the romantic in me, maybe, I sort of hoped that government might find a bit of extra money for us, a little bit, listening to what local authorities are feeding back. But I think, you know, I don't see any positive signs of that. Hope I'm wrong, but I don't see any positive signs of that. We've done some work on our business rates numbers, and the good news is that our forecast for next year indicates that we are likely to get an extra £200,000. So that will go towards our 2.6 million gap. So that's positive. There's a risk in relation to that, is that none of us know really what's going to happen with the economy. If lots of our businesses were to go under, that might affect that number, of course. But the reason the projections at this stage indicate a more favourable settlement is because of new businesses such as McDonald's, for example, but also businesses that were previously not on the rating system making their way onto the rating system as a result of action taken by the Valuation Office. So that's a positive for us. The government, and I think the report talks about this, the government referred to a local tax compensation scheme that applies, beg your pardon, the slide is wrong, but it applies to business rates and to council tax. And based on some initial work that Andrew has done, then we think our compensation might be in the region of about £60,000. We will have to work on the final figures, but that's what we think, about £60,000. We are, as officers, starting a line-by-line review of the budget, so looking to see what we can do now to stop some spending. Might be only on a short-term basis, but stop some spending to go towards reducing that 2.6 million use of reserves. I think there's some things that we can do straight away. There's, for example, our staff training budget. Carol Snell, our head of HR, is looking at our staff training budget, and we'll be reducing that. That's something that we can do immediately. I'm not saying we can do it forever, but I'm saying that we might be able to do something for now. I think there are opportunities for us to make better use of some of the ring-fence reserves we have around public health and better care fund, and we're looking to see if we can unlock that. And as members will know, there are clearly some medium-term things that are currently in the pipeline, such as our waste management recommission, whereby we are in the process of starting to develop a waste management strategy that clearly will go out to consultation. As members know, we're also looking at the future of leisure, and at the moment we are working towards undertaking a needs analysis that will give us a basis for thinking about what we might commission in the future. So there are some things already in the pipeline, and there'll be more things to be added to that. What I would say is the line by line review is more about stopping some spending to give us a windfall. So go back to the analogy I talked about before about earning 25,000 and spending 30,000. This is about us finding a couple of £1,000 down the back of the sofa. It doesn't solve our medium-term problem. The medium-term problem is core income is less than core expenditure. The fact that we found some money down the back of the sofa, it helps us a bit in the short term, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem. In terms of where we are this year in 2021, then we have nearly £1 million underspend on our budget. Now this is good, because what this is another windfall, if you like. What this does is it'll allow us to use that underspend to fund some COVID work next year, but also respond to likely pressures that we know we're going to get around social care in particular. This year, we envisaged getting an increase in the number of care cases we'd have to deal with, and that increase hasn't materialised. We believe that's to do with the lockdown and the restrictions. And in children's areas, it's a lot of the time it's to do with the fact that children are at home now, they're not going to school, so some issues may not be being picked up. So clearly the fact that we've got an underspend would allow us to meet costs next year. I want to be very clear with members, this underspend arises because of issues like social care, but also arises because we've had a lot of COVID grant from government. The way the government distribute that grants is at time a bit bizarre. So in some areas we've been given not a lot of money, and in other areas we've been given more money than what we probably need to deliver our response. But we are where we are. But what I can say is it's not £1 million underspend on our core budget. Because if it was, then we'd be thinking, hang on a minute, doesn't some of that underspend carry forward into 21, 22? But I'm saying to you, the underspend does not relate to that. It's like another windfall. Let's not look at it as anything else. And then further work we're doing on the future year tax base. I mentioned the tax base and how it's impacted by council tax. And we are looking at the tax base for the next 3 or 4 years. What does that mean for this budget? Not a lot. But what it does mean is in the report, I talk about the difference, the loss of yield, if you like, from a 3% council tax decision to a 5% council tax decision. I give some indicative years for losses over 5 years. It should actually say 5 plus the current year, but those figures are quite estimated, because if the tax base changes, the figures could be 10.5 million, it could be 9 million. It doesn't affect the decision this year. The annual gap that I've put in the report is accurate for 1 year basis. That's easy. It's when the tax base changes year on year, it becomes more complex. So we're doing some detailed work on that, but it's not massive. It isn't really relevant to the decision that members will make shortly. So there are some brief updates from me, which I hope are helpful. I know that Councillor Brown will like to say a few words and update on some other issues as well. And so I will hand over to him and I will stop sharing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Sav. Councillor Brown, would you like to take the floor for a few minutes?
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Yes, I'd like to just cover a number of points. The political elements of it, the Cabinet's viewpoint, council tax and savings. I'll run through these quite briefly. As you know, the leader, myself and Alicia Cairns, our MP, met with the Minister for Local Government, Luke Hall, a couple of weeks back. And we got our message across quite strongly, in fact, very strongly, in terms of the position we find ourselves in. He was somewhat surprised to find that the actual increase in government's settlement to us, ignoring the council tax, had actually been decreased. And the reason for that was around the new homes bonus. But our message was quite clear. Although we're a small unitary authority, we are very efficient. We spend less per household than the average unitary authority. We provide quality services. As you know, we're first in adult social care. We are in the top 25 authorities on recycling. Only 2% of our waste goes to landfill. Our roads are better than our neighbours, as you will find travelling out of the county. So we do a good job for our residents and we spend less. However, we do have very high council tax, and that is unsustainable. And that was made very clear. And if you read the article in the Rutland Times this morning, Alicia Kearns, our MP, is quoted as saying that, and she is definitely fighting on our behalf. The big issue, and Sav mentioned it in passing, but 80% of our spending power comes from council tax. The average across England is 60%. If we had 60% of from council tax and the rest from the government, then our position would be significantly better. I'll leave you to do the calculation, but it runs into many millions of pounds. So that is the issue that we face, and it's one that is not acceptable to myself, the leader of the cabinet. The other big issue we pointed out to the minister was over the issue of the adult social care white paper. Still hasn't come forward. Fairer funding review still hasn't come forward. Business rates retention still hasn't come forward. These are things that have been on the government's to-do list for many, many years. And then more recently, we mentioned to them the issue we have around SEND high needs, the high needs block of the education budget. And we're sitting with £750,000 in that account. The government will pay it to us, but who knows? Will they? I don't know. And by the end of next year, we're forecasting £1 million. My concern with that is the auditors turn around one day and say, well, the government have promised you the money, you haven't got it. I think you better start thinking about making a provision on this. And that would come out clearly out of either our earmark reserves or general fund reserves. And that's just an increasing number. Now, while we have a big problem with that, £1 million would be a disaster to us. I noted that Cambridgeshire has £28 million in their high needs pool currently. And that is part of the problem the government's got. These are big numbers and they don't know how to deal with them. In relation to the other points we raised, we said we saw a number of solutions. One was the new homes bonus, and we were surprised by how much that had reduced. The minister was surprised how much it reduced. Over £500,000 in year, and that's a very significant number. So he recognised that fact. We also pointed out, and I'll point you to 3.2.3 in the paper in front of you tonight, note number 5 on the table, and you'll note that that says that we return £1 million of our business rates to government when we collect them. In other words, we're allowed to keep 49%, but in fact, the 49% is then reduced by £1 million. And in relation to our numbers, that £1 million is almost 20%, very significant number. We pointed that out to them, and we said that might be all right for larger authorities, but for us, it's very major. And we asked them to reconsider that. The one commitment we did get out of him on the day, and he will take these away and look at them. The one commitment we did get was that we will get a seat at the table in terms of fairer funding review later this year. We understand that the fairer funding white paper will be coming out later in the spring, and we've been definitely, the minister's committed for us to be involved in that process to ensure that the position of Rutland is recognised, and small authorities particularly are recognised in that review. Our leader, Oliver Hemsley, has been doing other lobbying, not just directly with the minister, but through the LGA, Local Government Association, through James Jameson, and also through the Unitary Authorities Network. And we've been working with other authorities to make sure they recognise the problems that we've got. But I think, as Sav said, authorities across the country are currently £5 billion short. And that's what government are going to have to cough up one day. Otherwise, we're all going to be in the same problem. As far as the Cabinet's concerned, we fully support Sav's paper that he's presented to you. What he's saying is absolutely right. The only exception is the actual recommendation on council tax. Sav's absolutely right in his position to recommend the 5%. However, there is a different matter from our point of view, and that is the question of the recommendation that Cabinet have made. It's fully supported by Cabinet. We are proposing a 3% increase, and that is based on 3% this year and then 4% next year. Why 3% this year? Well, we feel that the residents are suffering enough. We know they're losing jobs. We're losing jobs. We know that there's shorter hours and less income coming in. We know that that increase of council tax will hit people with fixed pensions. I know of a senior manager in the county council who will be retiring not too distant future, and he said to me, look, I'm concerned about my future of living in Rutland because the proportion the council tax takes of my take-home pay is so high, I don't know if I can afford to live in Rutland anymore. That is not acceptable. Somebody who's got a long term in our employment in our county, giving our service, and then he has to leave the county. And there are many examples of young people just not being able to afford to live in our county. And it's not just the price of houses, it's that high proportion of council tax compared to our neighbours. So that's the key. The recommendation is that. And so the choice is 3 this year, 4 next year. Any other alternative means that we take, if it's more this year, we have less next year. If it's less this year, it's more next year. But remember, every pound that the county council takes out of the economy through council tax is a pound less that will be spent in our community. And we know that our shops and our hospitality trade in particular are suffering very badly. So us taking that money out of the community is not a good idea. Now, I accept what Sav says. That means it's a longer term impact on our finances. But on the other hand, we may, by taking that money out of the economy, also have longer term consequences on our economy and on the money that we can earn in the county elsewhere, either through business rates or parking charges, whatever it might be. Anyway, you can make up your mind on council tax. And then finally, on savings, we as members must deliver these savings. We have no alternative. I think Sav's made that absolutely clearly. We cannot sit and say, oh, well, maybe not that one, and maybe not that one, and maybe not that one. We have to, all of us, in fact, have to come up with those savings over the next 2 years. And even if we have a surplus this year, it is not a get out of jail free card. It is not going to help us in 22-23. We still have a £2.7 million deficit in 22-23, and we must deliver on that. We must reduce our costs. There is no alternative. Thank you, Chair. I'll take questions after any questions to Sav. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Who would like to start off with the questions, please? Your hands up. Mark, over to you, Mark Oxley.
Thank you. Yes, a question for Sav. Thank you, Sav. As the Section 151 officer, you have made a recommendation to full council, and Cabinet have actually disagreed with that recommendation. In your experience, is this the first time that this has happened in all the years that you have worked for Rutland County Council?
I think it is. I'm not sure. In previous years, I'm not. Obviously, Cabinet always make their view about what is proposed in terms of council tax. And certainly, I can't remember being in a position where my view was different. So this is the first time. Yeah, that's part of my role to advise, not necessarily to recommend, but to advise what I think is right in our financial context, and that's exactly what I've done. But yeah,
And just to come back on that, so you've made the recommendation based on your experience and talking to your peers, your colleagues in other local authorities, and talking to and looking at the way that the government has been funding in the past and where you expect the government to be funding in the future. So you haven't just pulled that figure out of the air. You have actually made the recommendation, the observation based on your many years of experience and basically what you are paid to do by the council. And that's why in the past we have always accepted your opinion and we have gone with your opinion. And so my next, which isn't, I mean, I would suggest that isn't hyperbole, that's actually fact. And the next question I have is with regards to the decision which we are being asked to make at the next full council. We are being asked to make that potentially with a political spin on it, because of the fact that, as I say, there are, we all recognise the fact that people are going through very difficult times at the moment, but we do have structures in place to assist those who have problems in paying their council tax. And so the 500,000 which we could potentially lose if we don't go with your recommendation will have to be found in subsequent years. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, can I just pick up on the first point you made? I mean, you made it sound a lot more complicated and complex than than my view about it. Actually, the government allow us to increase council tax by 5%. Councillor Brown agrees with me that the maximum yield for the council would be to increase by 5%. Me and Councillor Brown, we agree on that point. So I'm saying go with 5% because I'm all about maximum yield, because that shortens our gap. There are other issues which Councillor Brown has articulated about fairness and equity and how we're funded, and he's within, cabinets within their rights to think about those things. I am less worried about those things because all I'm thinking about is yield. So I don't talk to other colleagues in other councils. I haven't looked back at history. That's irrelevant to me. My main factor moving forward is I don't think the way in which government funds us is going to change. I think it will continue to be about council tax. But my recommendation is simply based on maximum yield. It's as simple as that. And as you say, turning to your other point, we do have provisions in place that allow those who are in hardship to get support, but that would apply to those in significant hardship. But others will be impacted who we may not be helping. That I accept that, but it doesn't factor into my recommendation, as it were.
Thank you. I'll wait to hear what everybody else has to say. Thank you.
Councillor Beggy has his hand up, and then Councillor Rozelle. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions. Do you want me to do one at a time and then let everyone else have a go, or should I just rattle them off one at a time?
Let's rattle them off, and then we can take turns going round. I think that's easier.
Thank you. If any of these are irrelevant for tonight, please let me know. My first one, Sav and/or Gordon. There is an investment, I believe, in £300,000 in consultants for these various new contracts. What is the expected return on investment on these?
Who's responding to that one? Sav, do you want me to respond?
Well, I'm happy to say something. I'm happy for you to say something, as you wish.
I think, first of all, why are we using consultants? Let's take the leisure centre. We're using consultants there to do a needs analysis. And I think that's critical to understand what is needed in our county as against what's wanted for leisure and fitness centre, as the case may be. So that piece of work, we don't have the skills for that. That'll be done externally. Similar with the waste contract, we have a situation in the waste contract where we, in fact, on the work we did for extending the contract, the people that worked with us at Resource Futures were able to identify the softness in the arguments by the contractors we're working with, and also able to demonstrate that from their experience, that they're working with a lot of authorities all across the country, they're able to demonstrate that the prices that we're being charged by the contractors in extension were in fact realistic and in line with the current market rates. And so we felt a lot more comfortable with that, about the increase that we're getting. We had somebody independent who was able to give us that advice. And that was very useful. And they are going to work with us to develop our waste strategy. And I'm sure Councillor Stevenson will add to this if she wants to build our waste strategy, and also to look at alternative routes for our waste to try and reduce our costs. We've set a target of a 10% reduction on the extended contract costs. And to do that, we need some really clever things about the methodology we use in handling our waste, how we do our waste collect, etc., and where we dispose of that waste through energy recovery and recycling. So we're using that money. We believe we'll get good returns. When you look at the waste contract, it's a very large contract over 10 years. I think 30 million rings a bell, Sav?
Nearly 40, if you look
Nearly
at it.
40.
Yeah.
So, you know, us spending some money up front on that to get the best deal and to save ourselves, you know, 4 or 5% on that contract, that will pay handsomely over that period. And certainly from my time in the environment function, I think this will be money well spent. It's not uncommon either. We've checked with other local authorities, and Penny Sharp, our Director of Places, have been involved in this elsewhere. And she says this is, in fact, we're probably being a bit stingy with the money we're putting in compared to many other authorities. But again, we're doing it well, we're doing it efficiently, we're keeping our costs to minimum. So that's the point on the consultants.
Very good. A yes, positive ROI, that would be fine. My second question, probably for Penny, and this may be a bit more controversial. Would we be able to consider putting all highways capital projects on hold unless there is a proven immediate risk to life?
Would you like me to come in on that? The highways capital projects are a separate budget. This is the revenue budget. I would urge extreme caution on trying to stop revenue spend on highways. If you let your highways network get into disrepair, then you run risks of other costs being incurred. So, for example, insurance claims, etc. So our capital highways projects come from obviously the capital budget. The revenue stuff is ongoing maintenance, which again, we've got a very high standard of road. Members may be minded to say, actually, our road's currently platinum, we're happy to have silver. So long as we're in line with DFT, that's fine, but that is something to discuss. In terms of the revenue budget, as Sav has indicated, every officer in every department is going through line by line, asking the question, do we need to spend this?
Penny, sorry, Penny has her hand up. Do you want to come in, Penny, or are you quite
yeah, just to add to that, and agree completely with Councillor Stevenson. The majority of the highways budget is capital funded from government, and we spend what we get. There is some revenue for certain activities which under sort of local government finance guidelines we can't count as capital funding. Through the line-by-line exercise that Councillor Stevenson and Sav both mentioned, we are looking again at whether there's opportunities to capitalise yet more of our revenue funding to minimise the impact on the budget. The point I would like to make is that because of the standard that we maintain our roads at, as well as the approach that we adopt, which is in line with DFT guidelines, we currently are considered what's known as a band 3 authority. So we are top of the class amongst other local highways authorities in the way that we approach our highways management. That means that we benefit from more capital funding from government. So if we change our approach or our standards, there are potential implications for capital, but it is certainly something that we could and should potentially be considering in the light of the financial position.
Nick, do you have a following question, or is?
No, I've just got one more question. I'll come back with some of the other ones later. Probably for Sav or anyone really. Have we done a piece of work to look at revenue versus lost income from asset disposal, such as Aswell, OEP, King Centre, Catmus, or even some sort of sale and leaseback agreement?
Penny, do you want to pick this up?
I can probably pick up the Ashwell. I think we know Ashwell. It looks like a £16,000 deficit in the year. Actually, I think it's 10,000 of that is actually depreciation, which is an in and out figure. It's not a revenue figure. And so the actual loss at there is 6,000. It is, in fact, as you probably know, Nick, not a great site and one that we've had for a long time. We've looked at, and I did quite a little work with Andrew Edwards, looking at putting housing on that site, trying to get revenue and capital from it. And the big problem there is flooding. And we looked at that. We approached Homes England to get money for that. And that certainly would have been an opportunity, but it just doesn't. The problem is that it's such a big problem. We then got the other issue, what do we do with the salt barn? And the cost, the capital cost of that. So we did look at it, but it just didn't stack together. There was too many risks involved. As far as OEP is concerned, OEP makes a reasonable return, and I think Andrew Merry's here and give the exact figures, but I think of the order of about 2%, Andrew, if I remember correctly. He's shaking his head, which is not bad. It could be better. And there is a project which Penny, myself, and Oliver were looking at, in relation to if you go into OEP, the left-hand side, the older side, what can we do with that to really make it hum? And the sort of comments you're making are certainly within that arena. As far as King Centre concerned, I think a return on capital at King Centre, we certainly, we could get capital back. It doesn't help our revenue, doesn't help our reserves, but we're making a good return on that. So why not keep the revenue coming in? And that helps our revenue budget, and therefore, we don't have to use so much for reserves. And I think, depends how you look at it, but I seem to remember figures of 20% return. Andrew? Yeah, Andrew's shaking his head as well. So, I'd love to get some return at 20% right now, and I'm sure they all would on your savings rather than the 0.1% we're currently getting. So I think from that point of view, yes, there's opportunity there, but as I think Sav said earlier, that would take a great deal of effort and time by the officers. And what we want to do is look at those areas where the officers can get the returns from savings as quickly as possible, and not spend 2 or 3 years looking at a project that may not actually deliver a great deal to us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Razan, Councillor McCarthy.
Chair, thank you very much. What I wanted to start with was a heartfelt thanks to Sav and his team for what is quite clearly the most difficult of times for anybody who's dealing with finance, and the extraordinary efforts that our officers are going to for the benefit of residents on our behalf to achieve what it can only be described as the best of a bad lot. What I've heard there is no good news for residents, and I think we need to be really honest with them about that, be public with them about that. It's clear that whatever we do, it will hit the pockets of those who are vulnerable. But in this case, I think I need to challenge the fact that the vulnerable will always be looked after, but in this case, the cuts will come from those who can't actually claim any rebates, and that's going to be more difficult. So the families won't be able to live in the way that they used to. That really saddens me. Sav, I want to ask one question at the moment and then come back to you. Given a question that's been asked this evening about your experience in the council and things that have happened in the past, and the fact that this year you find that the cabinet don't agree necessarily with your proposal, but they're putting something else forward. My question is, in your experience as the officer in charge of finance, in fact over your many years' experience, can you remember a year where the catastrophic events, national events that are affecting our finances have happened before.
No.
So thank you. That's really clear. So I think when we're talking about events that happen, there are some extraordinary events happening that we as a council must face up to, and I'm grateful for that. I'll come back later. Thank you.
Councillor McCarthy, over to you, please.
Thanks, Stu. I've got quite a few questions, but I think we'll just keep rotating them around if that's all right, because we might duplicate others. The main one is something I've covered. This is for Sav, but something I've covered in an email already. But I think I just want to bring it out here as well if I can, which is the real thing for me is the compound loss over time of the increase of 3% rather than 5%. And I had asked about that, and it represents a loss of around about £3 million over 5 years in terms of lost revenue. But what I hadn't asked about was this increase of 4% next year rather than 5%. So I don't, Sav, have you got any numbers or anything? I know, sorry, it's a bit short notice, but any numbers on the compound losses there for the 4% next year as well as the 3% this year?
Sorry, I don't understand the question. The MTF, I think there's two things. There's none of us really know what we'll be able to do in relation to council tax in the future. The only thing we do know for sure at this moment in time is that we can spread 3% over 2 years. So we know that we might be able to do 2% next year. I'm not sure, and I was looking back today, I'm not sure the government have actually confirmed what the referendum limit would be next year on general council tax. We think it's likely to be 2%, but I'm not sure that is actually confirmed. So none of us know what we can do in relation to council tax in future years. None of us know. What we assume is that we can raise council tax by 4% after this year, 2% for normal council tax, 2% for the precept. That's what we assume. That's what the MTFP assumes. So the decision of 3% in relation to that is the loss is set out in the report. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at in terms of the compound loss for something in the future. Do you mind just rephrasing that, maybe to help me?
Yeah, well, if we increase by 5%, obviously that leads to a further revenue in future years. If we only increase by 3%, then we lose out on, on the difference between the 3% and the 5%. We lose out next year and the year ahead.
Oh yes, and sorry, that is set out in section 4 of the report. So if you go for 5% this year, then over the next 6 years, actually, we would be 4.5 million better off over a 6-year period.
Yeah, which doesn't close our budget gap.
No, you're quite right. What it does close the budget gap a little bit, but it doesn't take away the big decisions you're going to have to make as members. There is no, this 3 or 5 decision doesn't give you an escape route. Yeah. If you do 3, you got to make big sacrifices. If you do 5, you got to make big sacrifices. You only hope's not the right expression. If government next year say unlimited council tax increases, you could go for 10% next year and cut the gap totally. That's your only hope on council tax if you think council tax is a way out.
Yeah. I'll just rattle off another couple of other ones, but and then I'll come on for a quick one for Gordon, if that's okay. We've got £266,000 in Brexit reserves. What do we anticipate using those for? I know Brexit's done, but are we still anticipating an effect?
Well, we haven't spent much money to date because we only spend money if we need to. It's one of those examples, as I said earlier, with COVID, the government give you money and sometimes the basis of it is pretty unclear, if I'm honest. We're still monitoring the position, see if there are any impacts. We're not seeing anything thus far. If there are, we'll spend some of the money. If not, we're not quite sure. It is, I believe, Andrew will nod his head, I think it's a Section 31 grant, isn't it, the Brexit? So in theory, you can repurpose that and do something else with it. Wouldn't surprise me, though, if government came back at some point and said, what did you do with the Brexit money? Did you use it on Brexit? But notwithstanding that, if it's a Section 31 grant, which means it's not ring fenced, then technically we could repurpose it. But we will spend it if we need to. But you know, we're pretty good. We don't normally spend money if we don't need to be honest.
Yeah. I see also we've got in reserves there, we've got a line titled pressure. What is that, Sav?
That was money that we set aside when we had underspends in a given year. We know that in some years we have pressures. So when we had an underspend, it's a few years ago now, we just created an earmark reserve called pressure that would allow us to meet some small pressures when we had them. You know, that's why we created that earmark reserve.
Okay, it just seems to me it's getting rather big.
The pressure reserve?
Yeah.
I don't think it's that big, is it, the pressure reserve? Forgive me in the numbers. I know the social care reserve is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, the social care reserve is, yeah, I understand.
So yes, the social care reserve is there because to iron out the peaks and troughs in social care. I mean, setting a social care budget is quite frankly a nightmare. None of us really know. We know what the current intake is, if that's the right expression, or cohort is, but that can go up or down. My view is when we have an underspend on that, you can't really celebrate because you know that the year after you could have an overspend. So we put the money away and we balance out when we do have pressures. That's what that's there for. And
okay.
And that's what we're planning to do. The use of earmark reserves over the next 3 or 4 years will be to pay for those pressures.
Carrying on the reserve, sorry to keep labouring.
No, it's fine.
Is there an argument for reducing the earmarked reserves a little bit and putting money, transferring some of that back into general reserves?
We can do that. I mean, fundamentally, it doesn't change the issue that we've got. The issue we've got is that even if you add both reserves together, the general fund and the earmarked reserves, if you keep spending 2.6 million more, you run out of money. Okay, it might be in 4 years' time rather than 3 years' time, but we could do that. And in fact, this year we are repurposing some of the reserves to meet the potential costs from the work that we're going to have to do in relation to ash dieback. And I think that's set out in the report, for example. But yes, we can look to repurpose reserves to the general fund, but again, it's not an easy way out. It doesn't change the big decisions we're going to have to make.
Yeah, sure. I was just thinking that, you know, I mean, I've looked down the reserves line and I see £500,000 for ash dieback, 266,000 for Brexit, and, you know, and pressures. Well, you know, I get the pressures bit, actually, that's fine, but it just seems to me that, you know, that there could potentially be relatively easily perhaps £500,000 there that we could squeeze back into general, or back into liquid funds that we could do something with.
Well, we can do something with them when they're with the reserves. All I will say is that whether they're in earmark reserves or general fund reserves, if members don't make some savings somewhere, we'll be using them in the next few years. Yeah. That's for sure.
Okay, and that brings me on. I've just got one question at the moment for Gordon, which is, Gordon, what's the plan to balance the books?
I think that's been clearly laid out by Sav. We have to make savings. There's two sides we can either do. We can either get more income or spend less. And currently, the most likely route is spending less. I'd love to say to you that, you know, Luke Hall will give us a bounty next year. And as Sav said, that is not highly likely. I think there'll be redistribution. To the extent of redistribution in the short term, not a lot, because as we've seen in previous redistributions, for those that have been in the public sector for a long time, what happens is that government says, oh yeah, we'll redistribute all this money, and then the top slice the top and the bottom slice the bottom, and they squeeze it all, and there's not a lot of change in the middle. And that's part of the problem. You know, the losers don't lose too much and the gainers don't gain too much. And it's a marginal movement. And I think that's the worry that Sav is quite rightly pointing out. Unless there's additional funds for local government, then there will not be a fundamental change. Now, yes, I think we can argue very strongly that for very small authorities, the big number changes or the small number changes to big authorities are big number changes to us. And I think we can argue that case, and hopefully something will happen. But I think as Sav keeps pointing out, 2.7 billion in 22-23 is not sustainable. We have to deal with that, regardless of whether we put the council tax up by 3% or 5%. Just remember, we put it up by 5% this year. On the current rules that government have played down, we can only increase it by 2% next year. So that is the argument that I put forward. We'll put it up by 3% this year, 4% next year, when we hope the economy is improving. Can I just pick up a couple of other points you made? And that was to do with adult social care. We have a large reserve because the variances in adult social care and children's is also very large. Yeah. A single package can be £100,000.
Yeah, I wasn't querying the adult social care reserve at all. I understand.
I know. I'm making. I think for the public and other members and children's, and we saw a package just a couple of years ago of £250,000 for one family. It just appeared out of nowhere, and these are really large numbers. And we just get half a dozen children and a couple of adults that are expensive, and all of a sudden those numbers look really quite sick. Ash dieback, I think. Yes, £500,000 worth of ash dieback. That is quite a small sum of money, I have to say. We have 17,000 trees in Rutland, ash trees. And we, at some stage, are going to look at that, really seriously look at it. Leicestershire reckon they're going to lose 75% of their ash stock over a longer period of time, admittedly. But that's why we've created this £500,000 reserve, so we can start that work. Now, I've had discussions with officers, and now Lucy's taken that on, to see, can we turn this into a revenue stream? Can we use that wood and sell it in some way to get money back to make that a zero-sum game? And that is something we've got to do in the medium term.
I got a bit lost on that because 17,000 ash trees is well, it's a lot of ash trees, but not a surprising number. I didn't remember seeing that in a report, though. I saw a much smaller number than that in a report, and I won't be able to find it now because I can't remember where it was. It was in one of the reports here.
You're absolutely right. My apologies. It's 12,500 ash trees, 17% of our total stock.
Okay.
I got the numbers the wrong way around. 12,500 ash trees.
Are these council-owned ash trees? Are these ash trees on council land?
That is council land and highways. So along the edge of highways as well, all those ash trees are our responsibility. And we have a serious responsibility there. A local authority was in court over not taking down a dying tree, and it sadly killed a bus driver. We don't want to be in that position. Thank you.
Councillor Oxley, you've got your hands up, and then some of the other people that haven't had any comments yet.
I just wanted to ask a question of Gordon with regards to in the past, every single year that I've been on the council, the leader and deputy leader have been to Westminster pleading our case, and we have got no real response back from them as a result. And I was just wondering what you feel is different this year, so you feel that you will be able to persuade the government to look at us in a different light, when in the past we have not been able to do that.
Chair, I think, am I confident? I'm not overconfident. Do we expect anything? On fairer funding, I think from the discussions that Oliver and I had with the Minister, I felt by getting a seat at the table, and this is the very important part of it, this is not just going through the LGA or SPARS, whoever it might be, but actually having a seat at the table with the officers, the civil servants, as they are developing that fairer funding review. We have a chance, I only say a chance, of influencing the outcome for Rutland and smaller authorities like the Isle of Wight and others. So I think, yeah, I'm not saying that it's a slam dunk. We've got to work very hard to get something back on that. And certainly over this next 6 to 9 months, that's quite important.
And what if they turn around and say, well, you had the chance to increase to get more money from council tax and chose not to. So obviously you don't need more money.
No, I'm sorry, we're going to get the 3% and 2 lots of 2% over the 5 years. Yes, there's a gap on that in terms of the ultimate sums we get in 6 years' time. But I think I certainly take the viewpoint, the Cabinet takes the viewpoint, that we have a very difficult position this year. We have residents who are suffering, and we recognise that. We don't want to put the council tax up to the maximum. And I note that North Yorkshire County Council have just taken that same decision. Their Cabinet, they're going for 3.5%, admittedly, but they've taken that decision and recommended 3.5% to their council in the next coming month.
Councillor Payne, you've got your hand up. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, quick one for Sav. Your line-by-line review, when does it complete, and are you expecting anything significant to come out of that review? You're on mute.
I'm sorry. I'd hope it's complete by the end of February in terms of the initial work. I think then it'll take a month to put everything together and for people to go away and do some of the actions that we've talked about. So I am looking to see whether we can report something back to members in April.
Okay.
This is all pandemic permitting, of course. That's the sort of timetable. What am I expecting? I'm expecting us to reduce the 2.6 million deficit in year. So I expect us to find some one-off savings. I expect us to make more use of some of the earmark reserves we've talked about. I'm not expecting it to translate into massive recurring savings that eat into the 2.7 million deficit that Councillor Brown talked about for 22-23. We might get a bit towards that, but I'm not expecting that 2.7 to turn into 1.7, for example. But I do think it will stop us using 2.6 million or 2.4 as it now is, but 2.6 million pounds worth of reserves in 21-22. I think we'll do some emergency stuff like taking people's mileage budgets away and telling them to do Zoom calls rather than travel. We'll take away some, like I say, some training budgets away. I'll stop people subscribing to things they want to subscribe to, not want to, stuff that's pertinent to their roles, but we'll just have to be really harsh and take a view. So there will be things that we can do. I don't know the figures yet because it really is a work in progress, but I'm definitely expecting the 2.6 million to come down. Hopefully to below 2 million. In fact, I'm confident it will. I don't think there'll be that much that carries on to the year after. So big decisions we're going to have to make.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Rosell, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. The question this time is for Councillor Gordon Brown. Gordon, in light of what I believe tonight are observations, suggestions that the recommendation from SAV of 5% is absolutely right for the residents of Rutland, who clearly in some cases cannot afford to pay that amount. It strikes me that at a time where we find our budget completely unbalanced with the central government budget, and residents who are clearly demonstrating to us that whilst they can't, because of their circumstances, claim any benefit of any kind, would you agree, or would you comment then that actually as a council we should be collectively looking towards central government to behave appropriately rather than penalising our local community with a 5% rate that at the moment they are struggling to find?
Councillor Rosell, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And in fact, that was the very point that we made to the Minister when we sat with him and said, look, this is totally wrong at this time. In future years, maybe, the situation is not acceptable. When you're not prepared to put up tax across the country, you're expecting local authorities to put up council tax and gain income that way rather than bringing it across the country. And so we made that point very clearly. We also said it's inequitable in this year, this current year, because of the current pandemic situation. You know, in my view, it's sadly for many of our residents, it's only going to get worse as time goes on. And the sort of leak today from government that hospitality won't open till early May is just frightening. I do not know how the hospitality industry is ever going to recover from this, and we're going to lose a lot of the hospitality industry and therefore jobs in it, and that's going to have an impact on people in our community. So yeah, I think that's the fundamentals. We've made it very clear to the government, and we will continue to make that point. And I know Alicia is making that point as well, and you saw her article this morning in the Rutland Times.
No, thank you. And the supplementary, somewhat strangely this time, goes to Sav. Sav, I think your very clear direction about the circumstances we're in, and perhaps then supported by Gordon in his response just then. My take is that you're expecting all councillors, regardless of persuasion, to fundamentally support the cuts and the savings that need to happen so that we as a council could continue to provide services for our community, but not to balk later on and suggest that actually perhaps we can do something different. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm expecting council as a collective to make the decisions we need to make to ensure that we are financially solvent. I understand that members will have different views about where we should make savings and do things less. That's democracy. That's part of normal business. But what I would say is that if we have councillors who don't like anything that we put forward, who don't vote for anything, I'm not really sure if we have that type of approach, I don't think we'll make the decisions collectively that we need to. So I would encourage any member who says that one I don't agree with to ensure that they have an alternative, because it's very easy, isn't it, to allow everybody else to make the decisions and say, well, I wouldn't have done that. And my question to those members is, well, what would you have done then?
That's really clear. Thank you very much.
Do we have any more questions from the committee members at all? Abby, you've got your hand up again. Would you like to go next?
Thanks, June. Yeah, it's just back to Gordon again. The idea of balancing the books. I got a bit of an answer, Gordon, last time. Thank you. But have you got any specific ideas of where we might find those savings? I mean, we all know we need to find £2.5 million of savings, but what cuts do you think we might make?
I think, Councillor McCartney, all the councils sat down during the summer and autumn of last year and looked at a whole range of subjects. And I think some of those are certainly worthy of further investigation. So you're aware of the areas that we're talking about. I think it's unfair to come out and say tonight any one particular area, because that may not be one that we would go. And I think it's not fair either on our staff involved in those areas, or for that matter, the residents who may use those services currently.
I think, I get that. I think equally you need to be fair on the staff though, because Sav has a requirement to balance the books, and we need to be fair on him.
Absolutely, and I agree with that. And if this was the private sector, I'm sure, as Councillor Bull would have agreed, would have sat down as a board two months ago and decided we'd be implementing it on the 1st of April. But we're not the private sector, we're the public sector, and we have to do it in a different way.
Can we go to Councillor Rizal? I know Councillor Waller, you want to speak, but can we just let the committee members go first, please?
Sorry, Chair, I think that's an old hand. Apologies.
Oh, okay. Do we have any more committee members that wish to speak?
I've got another couple of little questions, if that's okay.
Yeah. That's fine.
I see in the local plan or planning line of the revenue budget, we've got a provision for the local plan. Have we got a provision for legal costs, and what you know, what might it be, or where might it be showing? So, for example, in the event that we get a, you know, a legal challenge to the plan or something like that.
Well, we've obviously got a legal budget, which was increased over 12 months ago. And we do have a, you know, we talked about the pressure reserve earlier. We do have earmarked reserves, which could be used to fund legal costs. I don't like to really have lots of legal budget, because it encourages people to, encourages people to want to challenge us and spend money, quite frankly. But unfortunately, there are lots of residents who are in lots of different areas do challenge the decisions we make, and it simply means we'll have to make more cuts later on if they win, or whether they win or don't. But that's the reality of where we're at, isn't it?
Harry, do you have a secondary, or is that done? You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I think I'm done. I think I'm done for the moment. Thanks.
Okay, do we have any other committee members before I pass over to Councillor Waller, who's been waiting very patiently? I can't see any hands, so over to you, Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to ask a question or two. Can I start, though, by saying how very grateful I am to all our staff for all the hard work they do to produce the excellent services that we get, and at actually a low cost per head of population, which I know, and Gordon's nodding, I know is something that Gordon also made the point about to ministers, because we do provide excellent services, but we do it at a very good rate, and that's something we should be proud of our officers for doing. I endorse everything that the portfolio holder Gordon Brown has said in his meetings with Oliver, and endorse Oliver for doing it too, with the ministers. And I have absolutely no doubt that neither ministers nor indeed the civil servants who work on it appreciate that when they work out a formula, that it doesn't work across the piece. And I'm going to tell the story now that I didn't tell last night. About 20 years ago, the government decided they wanted fair funding for schools because there was great inequity between the schools, and that none of the money was going to go through local authorities. It was all going to be funded directly. And that the money they then gave to local authorities, that would be the pot. And I pointed out to ministers, actually it was David Blunkett at the time, so you can tell how long ago it was, that they would actually have to take money away from local authorities, from the council taxpayers, in addition to the grant that was already given, because some authorities at that time were giving, a lot of authorities actually, were giving their schools more than the school's grant money was. And in the case of Richmond upon Thames, which was the example I gave, they would have had to have taken a third more, because a third of the money going into schools was going in from local council taxpayers. And this came as a shock to them, because they didn't appreciate that for a small authority like Richmond upon Thames, the formula might not work quite the same way as it did for a Lancashire or a Hampshire. They abandoned the whole scheme completely and totally. And I worry that for all the good words that are going to be said, and I do applaud the fact that our representatives will be at the table, because that will make a big difference to understanding at the very least, that actually an attempt at fair funding will simply get shelved in total, because it falls in the tray that says too difficult. And I can see from Gordon's face that he worries the same way as I do. But I wanted to say that as a precursor, because we as I know, I'm getting to my question. because we as councillors need to understand that the situation might not get any better. And our decision in February, when we make our decision on the council tax and so on, the difference between the 3 and the 5% is the cumulative impact. Whichever we choose will be making cuts. But the question is, what level of cuts do you want to make? Because it's going to be bigger if you only go for the 3% now. And it's very easy to say, oh, well, bus routes is coming up first. Oh, we like bus routes, we can't cut that. And then something else comes up, oh, we like that, we can't cut that. And at the end of the day, we'll be halfway through the year. And it's just the ones that come last get cut because they come to us last. And it's not going to be easy for any of us. And I wanted to bear that in mind. And that then comes to my question. And my question is this. I think from the consultation that we've put out, and certainly the response I've had from residents in my ward, it's being portrayed very much as a black and white. Do we want to go for this % or that %? And I don't think, I personally, from the responses I've got, don't think that our population understands the nuances. They don't understand why our council tax is so high. And they don't understand what it could mean in terms of cuts. They haven't been given any examples of that. And I wonder if either the leader or the deputy leader would like to comment on the nature of the communication that we've put out on the budget to the population as a whole.
I'm a bit unclear about the question, Gail.
The question is, the responses I'm getting from the public is that we don't want to pay any more council tax because we're only being asked, do we want 3% or 5%? And when I say, well, it's slightly more nuanced than that, they say, oh, we didn't know this, we didn't know that. And of course, most people aren't going to read through, you know, this file that oh no, I'm not going to lift it up, it's too heavy. This file I've got in front of me. And I think we've simplified it too much. Do Oliver and Gordon think we've simplified too much the message we're putting out to the public?
I might just come in on that if that's all right.
Yeah, please do. I'm just trying to think of it.
I think, you know, yes, our finances have been something that I don't think the general public fully understand and have never really got their head round. I think the infographic that we used last year and is again this year actually explains where some of that money goes. And I think the reality is that the cuts that we're going to have to make are those that we need to make the decisions on in a sensible, mannered way that ensures that we actually support our community the best way we can, but we take those cuts. We've got time to do them. I think what Sav's been saying is if we don't do them this year, then they'll turn the tap off and it'll stop. It won't be a choice of whether we decide or don't decide. So I think the information's there, and it's probably down to elected members to help their residents if they do have questions. So, you know, and if you need more information, I know Sav is very stretched, but I'm sure that, you know, we would give background or support information if that would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I am helping my residents, and Sav has been fantastic at helping me get my head around it all in the last couple of weeks. And I do appreciate it very much indeed. I just think we could have done more in the first, I think we could have done more in the first place. You don't think so, Oliver, but that's absolutely fine. You answered my question, and thank you, June. That was really all it was.
Okay, fine. So are there any recommendations on this that we put forward to Cabinet? Does anybody have a recommendation? Are we going to leave it for full council for individual votes? Councillor Oxley.
Yes, I think this should be left to individual members on the night. It's a very contentious decision we are being asked to make, and I wouldn't want to preempt anything which we were going to say on the night this evening. This is more about information sharing and asking questions, whereas on the night is time for the debate.
Okay, are we all happy with that before we move on? Yeah, everybody's nodding their heads. So we'll move on to item 6, which is the Treasury Management Strategy and Capital Investment Strategy. Over to you, Sab, again.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do a brief introduction. This is a report that we're required to bring as part of the budget. I will cover the borrowing and sort of investment side of it separately. In terms of borrowing, then we have about £22 million worth of borrowing, largely from PWLB. Borrowing costs you money in the revenue account. So there is a borrowing charge related to that borrowing in the revenue account. We look for opportunities to see if we can repay borrowing early. If it was financially advantageous to do that, we would. That opportunity hasn't presented itself thus far. In terms of our strategy, then what I would recommend is that there's no new borrowing. As I say, if you borrow, then there's a revenue charge. So if you borrow £10 million over 20 years or whatever, or 50 years, you'll get a 200 grand charge in the revenue account. And given the gap we've got of 2.6 million, that gap would just grow. So I don't recommend that we borrow further, unless, of course, that borrowing was going to generate revenue that helped our revenue position. So that exceeded that £200,000 revenue charge and maybe give us additional income. As members know, we've been looking for such opportunities for some time, and those opportunities haven't presented themselves. Members will also be aware that the government are rather annoyed with local authorities that have done that in the past and now find themselves in rocky waters because of what's happening with the economy. So yes, I'd love to find a commercial opportunity that was beneficial to us, but I think if members think that's an easy way out of things, I just don't see it happening, certainly in the medium term. In terms of investments, then we play it relatively safe. We invest obviously in approved institutions. We have looked at other options like property funds. They're not something that we're willing to pursue at this time. Once you put your money in property funds, it's sort of there for 20, 25 years for you to get the return that you might want. I'm talking a return of 3.5% maybe. I'm not sure it's the best time to invest in property for lots of different reasons. So we do tend to play it safe. And as I say, we'll continue to do that, and do the best we can on the markets that we're willing to invest in. That's it from me, Chair, on that. I'm happy to take any questions that members might have.
Do we have any questions at all? I don't see any hands and raised at all. So can we go on to the next, which I seem to have lost because my iPad went down. So it's fees and charges. So Saf, do you want to quickly go through that?
Yes, so fees and charges, again, is an annual report. We look at the fees and charges every year. A lot of fees, obviously, are determined nationally. Those that we have discretion over locally tend to be cost recovery based, so you can recover costs, you can't actually make a profit. In reviewing the fees and charges, we do obviously look to make sure that we can recover costs, and that's something we've worked hard on over the last 2 years. Obviously, members have recently approved an increase in the green waste charge, and that reflects exactly that. I referenced at the start of my budget presentation the additional costs in extending the waste management contract, and so it's only right that we recover those costs for the green waste element through that charge, which we've done. In relation to the conversation we've been having about budget and income, do I think we're missing a trick in terms of the charges? Do I think there's a £250,000 out there that we're not getting? No, I don't. But we will continue to look at fees and charges and ensure that we get the best that we can do. Again, Chair, happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Sav on this at all? I can see no hands up. Oh, Abby, nearly missed you.
Thanks. The fees and charges list is quite long. It strikes me that some of them are a little bit cheap. I think we might be undercharging. Sav, do you feel we are undercharging on some of the I mean, I reference particularly actually the green waste charge. Now you, since you brought it up, £45 for a fortnightly collection. You know, send an HGV round once a fortnight during April to October or November, whenever it is, seems bloody cheap to me.
As I say, we have set that fee to recover the costs that we have, and I believe we do recover the costs that we have. This year, quite rightly, we've increased that charge to reflect the increased cost that I referred to a moment ago. Trust me, if I thought we were subsidising this service, I would be asking for a greater increase in fee. But we're not in that position, and it is fair. You know, it is fair that we need to be, you know, where the legal basis for charging is to recover costs. You know, it's absolutely sacrosanct that we stick to that, which we have.
And what's your general feeling about our fees and charges in general? Do you feel we are fair? Do you feel we are cheap, expensive?
Difficult question for me to answer. I run very few. I don't run any services that make these charges up. But what I can say is, working with my colleagues, they are very well aware of the financial position we're in. As I mentioned a moment ago, we did make quite significant changes to fees and charges a couple of years ago, and I'm sure Councillor Brown will talk about that. I know he's got his hand up. So I believe that we do, you know, we are not leaving big prizes out there. I'm pretty certain of that. I'm glad you think the charges are low, because if we're recovering costs and the charges are low, that's a good thing. But anyway, Councillor Brown, he's got his hand up. Councillor Brown, over to you. Would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think Sav's referred to it previously. We did a fairly major piece of work. I think it was 2 years ago, Sav, where we went through all the fees and charges. In particular, we did quite a lot of comparison work with other local authorities. And one of the things we found was that we were, in fact, too low, particularly in comparison to Peterborough and what they were charging, Peterborough City Council. And so those charges have been significantly increased. A good example that I came across was the cemetery, where we were charging less for the county council cemetery for an interment than my parish council was in North Nottinghamshire. And I thought that was not right. And that figure was in fact increased significantly, much more in line with the real costs that we were incurring with the cemetery. So I think that work was done. It's always good to do a piece of work like that every now and again, and probably in the next year or 2 years, we should do the same exercise all over again, go right back through it and start from the ground up and do it all over. But I think having looked at those numbers quite extensively, particularly in the environment area, in property and in planning, our rates are comparable.
Are there any further questions at all? No? Well, thank you all for attending tonight, and I declare the meeting closed at 8:30. So have a good evening all, and thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Much appreciated.